Alright, so today's lesson is going to be on dragons. So when we first start in, we're going to start with the first part, which is the rule of 130.
Warning, warning, warning.
So what I'm going to show you guys is I'm going to show you how fast your character walks from the fountain to dragon. This might be like kind of like a boring thing, but it's really important for you to visually understand like how long your character actually takes to walk to a certain location. Because one of the main premises for dragon is obtaining vision, right? We always want to obtain vision around the neutral objectives. So kind of knowing how fast your character gets to an objective visually is really important so that you can kind of assign time for when you need to reset and get wards. As like a support in general, it's pretty much like kind of the entire premise of the entire game is to make sure that you can walk there fast enough to establish vision. So this will be the first thing, which is we're just going to look at tier 2 boots, because this is usually after a minute or so. So I'm going to start at 20 seconds, and we'll just start walking our character there. Basically, the premise behind the minute and 30 rule is just the fact that we want to reset, which takes 8 seconds. We want to walk from our fountain to the dragon area, and then be able to establish control. A huge thing, like in games in general, is just managing your time very well. It's something that I teach like pretty often. So you can kind of see right here, it takes about 25 seconds or so to get there, and that gives you about a full minute to walk in and start establishing vision. So that's the first premise that I just wanted to visually show to you guys. When we talk about things like the rule of 130. If we're always resetting about a minute and 40, a minute and 30 seconds before the dragon spawns, then you will usually have enough time to get to the location and establish vision. This is the really important thing. So let's first jump into okay, so let's first talk about vision around dragon and how to where we want wards in each of the locations first, and then we'll start talking and showing you kind of like the visuals behind how we want to play around dragons in certain locations and such. So whenever we're establishing vision around dragon, it's really important to kind of have what's called like a protective line. So usually when we're putting pinks down, the premise and principle behind it is you always want a pink behind your vision. So for example, if we have a pink in either of these two locations, then what happens is we always want to have wards over the walls. So you can kind of see right here that in these kinds of premises, we're sitting on pink so we know that they're not warded, but we have vision out here so we can throw spells over the wall and so we can see people coming in to contest. So this is kind of like the bread and butter when it comes to vision control. And it's why mid lane wards are so helpful and important, as you can kind of see right here. Because if you have mid lane wards, you can see if people are pushing out mid to rotate over to contest vision. So whenever you're on the blue side, this is kind of like the ideal line that we're working with, is something along these lines. Your wards can be a little bit adjusted just depending on where your line can be established. So if, like, for example, if you treat this as kind of a line and then something like this is a kind of a line, then if you can go deeper and get deeper vision, that's always ideal. But you can always obtain this kind of vision pretty easily as long as you're being timely with your time. So remember the rule of 130, if we get here with about a minute till dragon, anybody who's usually not good with their time will be resetting about a minute or even 30 seconds beforehand, and that's already too late, as you've kind of already seen, right? It takes so long to walk over to this. Dragons don't really do a lot of damage to you, and they die quite fast. So that's why it's really important for us to kind of understand the rule of 130 and try to apply it as frequently as possible. Another thing that is really important too is if you play certain champions with really long cooldowns, and you ideally want to avoid fighting in situations like this. So if you're a player who likes playing a champion like Seraphine in the early stages, right? She has about a 2-minute cooldown. If your ultimate is coming up when the dragon is spawning, that's already too late. That's kind of the way I want people to think about dragons in general, is the minute before dragon is the time allotted for you to contest vision, to establish vision, to fight, maybe catch people, and that is why it's really important to make sure that you're trying to actively avoid fighting beforehand. Sometimes it happens, and I understand that, but if you apply this rule, you usually can get dragons quite easily. So these are kind of the lines that we're looking for when it comes to establishing vision for each of the dragon sides. So if you are on obviously the bottom side and you're pushing in, we want to establish vision over here. This allows you to see over the walls and people coming through the corridors, and also allows you to see the extra corresponding location right here. You can move this ward over to here if you can get deeper, but the main premise is that if you're always getting to this location first, then you can establish this vision basically by yourself by just warding over walls. And this is why like these wards are really great, is because you can establish most of this vision basically without ever committing too far. As you can kind of see right here where I'm moving the character, you can always throw them over vision and over walls, so that it means that you're less likely to get caught while placing vision. Establishing vision in that sense is really, really important, and that is one of the most important things when it comes to that. But kind of dialing it back, first off is how do we obtain dragons in the early stages? So what I'm going to show you is kind of a visual representation of why pushing is really helpful and why and how to get dragons in the early stages. So these are the pre couple of minutes into it kind of deal. So let's first establish kind of the screenshot that's going on right now, which is the fact that we have the push in. So usually when it comes to early stage dragons, they play a little bit differently than the later stage ones, which is that damage is very high. You know, everyone's level 4, level 5, maybe level 6, and most people are incredibly squishy, and they're usually using a decent amount of their resources on the wave before going over to this dragon. So how do you obtain dragons in the early stages without actually being contested? Because that's usually what you want. You don't really want to have fights over dragons, because anyone who's had a jungler walk over and do a dragon, right, will see that your dragon will end up doing about 50% of your jungler's health. And we want to make sure that we're actively avoiding scenarios like that. So, important thing to note is just establishing push and then rotating over. So, what we want to always do when we're trying to get dragons in the early stages is to communicate with our teammates via pings and then establish pressure that way. So, one thing that I can tell you right here is, oh, we are building a wave. So for example, right back here, oh, we have the push. That means we can ping, oh, hey, jungler, we can do dragon whenever we want. By pushing in this wave and being able to rotate over, you kind of see that the enemy players have to then catch the wave. So timeliness is of the essence. So we're going to push in this wave as our jungler, you can kind of see right here, is moving to the dragon at the same time. That way the wave crashes into the turret, and at the same time we can walk over. Now, I know that not everyone's going to have this level of coordination, which means that pings are really important. So whenever you start getting control of a lane and you're getting the push going, and your jungler is anywhere in the vicinity bottom lane, pinging assist me on the dragon is basically the same way to convert this dragon. So as you can kind of see, right, the enemy players have to catch the bottom wave, which allows you to rotate over this dragon very easily. Because of that, we're able to just do this dragon without anyone being able to contest it. This is kind of the core fundamental for getting early dragons, because usually you don't want to have any fights over it. It's very sketchy to have fights over it, and for the most part, we just want to get the dragon and then get out. Because of that, it just allows us to gain this dragon without like having a fight. And you can kind of see right here, which is really important, that our jungler is actually under 50% health, even with shielding and healing. So main thing is either you score kills in your lane, or if you just have push, then you can create pressure that way. Another factor to keep in mind, though, whenever you're doing dragons like this in the early stages is mid lane, which is a factor a lot of people tend to forget. So also another factor that goes into why we can do this dragon is because our mid laner is here, healthy, and can walk over. Now, if you come into a scenario where maybe your mid laner has backed when you're getting the push down, that means that the dragon usually isn't a good idea, unless the enemy mid laner is relatively low on mana and health, and he's probably going to back after the wave. These are kind of factors that we tie into dragon and what makes dragons successful in the early stages. But if you end up having scraps and skirmishes over the dragon when you're level 4, level 5, level 6, you'll probably find that most of them are hectic, random, and kind of uncomfortable in most cases because of the fact that the dragon just does so much damage to the jungler. So we want to make sure that we're actively avoiding that and creating scenarios like this where we get the push and we rotate over and we just grab it very cleanly. Another thing to note too is the power of like your damage. So standing in certain locations is going to be a really important thing for whenever you're creating pressure around dragons. So for example, for people who like playing tanks for most of their games, it's really important that you're positioning in good spots where you can actively see where people are coming from and be able to actively turn fights in this sense. So what I want to kind of draw your attention to is a couple of things in this scenario. So this is going to be a later stage dragon. So the rule of 130 is still going to apply for this game, which is basically that you establish pressure in the early stages a minute before dragon. As you've kind of seen, we've reset and our dragon is coming up in about a minute and a half, and we establish mid pressure. So as we can kind of see here also, just for visual clarity, we've established that we have a pink here and a ward over this location for our red side control. The reason why this vision is just super important is because chokes and corridors are basically your win conditions for dragons. It's very easy for you to basically win any fight when people are funneling through chokes because it's just easier to hit skill shots. And especially if you can see the enemy players walking through it, it makes it very, very easy for you to create this pressure. This is also why timeliness is very important though when it comes to dragons, because the sooner you get to the dragon and establish control, the sooner you can create pressure in this sense. I'm sure a bunch of you have played games where, oh, there's 30 seconds left, you're walking out of base, you're trying to get to the dragon, and instead of walking, up through mid lane and walking down here where you can see that there's a huge amount of space for you to work with, a lot of people tend to funnel through these chokes, like on this ramp right here. And that means that you're basically operating in a disadvantage because you have no way of obtaining vision and you don't know where anyone is standing. The main thing to note too in scenarios like this is just that when you are a tank, you don't deal a lot of damage to dragons. So pretty much at this point in time, so like 15 minutes, 18 minutes, right, we've had 1 to 2 dragons spawn. So we're kind of in the mid game of the stage of this game. Is that whenever you are controlling space like this, you don't actually want to be hitting the dragon, which is a huge mistake a lot of people make. And it's also something that a lot of people make when it comes to barons. So main thing that I want you to point out is how to obtain this deeper side vision. So if for whatever reason you're not here before someone and there's a lot of people contesting, then what you do is kind of what we saw right here, which is we walk mid and we force the wave in mid, and then you can rotate over this location. The way I want you to think about mid lane is the fact that it's walking wards and it's pressure on the map. So for anything that's not soul point, you can make active decisions about trading objectives. So for example, let's say you walk on this mid wave and you push it, and the enemy team just continues to sit in this jungle where you can't contest because you don't have any vision. Then what you can do is you can just run down mid and take turrets. Now, if it's not the sole point, then this allows you to eke out advantages in terms of control on the map, and that will be better for you in the future because you can continuously run down here if they just sit in this location. Most of the time, though, if you contest the mid wave, most of the people will then show on the mid wave, which allows you to establish vision here. So as you can kind of see, one of our lines that we've incurred is because of the fact that we're just here first. Being here first just allows us to establish an insane amount of vision and gives us a ton of map pressure in this sense. And as you can kind of see right here, anytime that you're obtaining mid vision and you have nothing to do, just walk back over into the locations where you have vision control and you'll be in good shape. This is kind of how we want to play and set up dragons. So next is going to obviously be the 30 seconds before the dragon. So as you can kind of see right here, you want to posture and be around this location. That way your teammates can push in the mid wave before rotating over. And the most important thing that I want you to look at in this kind of clip right now is the fact that we're walking constantly over locations we know we have vision advantage of. So right here we have this pink ward, we have the ward down mid to spot people, and we have multiple wards in their jungle. So we have a lot of information on where they're coming from, and it allows us to reposition or make catches whenever we want to. And that's why this kind of vision control is very important and why being timely to your neutral objectives is super helpful. Because of the fact that I took a reset earlier than the enemy team, I was able to basically have full control of this the entire time, and I get to kind of dictate a lot of the fight. Next is chokes, right? So this is going to be a good representation physically of the choke. So as you can kind of see right here, because of the fact that we always had control of mid wave, the enemy players have to funnel through this location. Now, this is a really important position to be in. A lot of people tend to, when they play tanks especially, or CC champions, they're DPSing the dragon the entire time. This is a big no-no. Basically, after the level 6 or above scenario of dragons, we don't actually want to be DPSing the dragon at all. The only time that you should be tanking or DPSing the dragon is if you've scored kills or your jungler is too low that he can't tank it. Because usually at this stage of the time, the game. The dragon doesn't do that much damage to your jungler. It's not like when we looked at the Gragas at level 5, level 6, where you had half health. Your jungler should be healthy most of the time, and most of what's important is getting in position for team fights. So, brushes that are great to stand in are this line brush, and this brush. These are always great locations for looking for picks or looking for turns. And this is what I want you to constantly be thinking about around neutral objectives rather than DPSing it the entire time. So this is kind of like the advantage that you get to build because you've established vision in that sense. Is you've now forced the enemy players to running through the choke, and we're standing in this location. This location is good if you are constantly looking for a turn and you have lots of people following up on this concave. But as you can kind of see right here from our minimap, the players are actually really far back down here. So if I was standing in this brush, no one would be able to actually help me actively turn. So that's why I'm standing in this brush, which is actually the hardest, if you can kind of see, for the enemy players to access. So because we've been here first, right, and we've kind of done our steps, the enemy players to get access to this brush have to run so deep into the location, but there's already immediacy forced upon them because Dragon is being done. This makes this location really, really good. Now, for anyone who likes running Hextech Flash, and maybe you have used your Flash in a previous fight, you can also stand over the wall right here and Hextech Flash over the wall, and that will also give you a good angle if you're concerned about them and their ability to face check this brush. This location, though, for the most part, I usually only use if I'm a skill shot ranged champion. So examples of this are like if I was playing Thresh or Morgana and players were coming through this corridor, I could definitely use this location because this is in quick proximity of this choke. Whereas if I'm standing here, I'm Thresh or Morgana, it gives them kind of a space to move through this concave, and it's a little bit harder for you to look for turns. So because of the fact that we have vision advantage and we force them into the funnel, this allows us to actually turn. Plus, on top of that, we're in a location that if they do end up face checking, we're in a really good spot to score kills on this fight. And you can kind of see how seamless and good for this fight is for us just because of the fact that we have good location and because of the fact that we've done good prep work on this location. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a fight that actually looks like the same fight basically, but we're going to actually be able to use this location. So as we can kind of see right here, they have to get through the choke in the funnel. Lots of damage is going on. And because of this, I get to control the fight and get to go on whoever I want. So you can kind of see right here that now I have created space because I'm the tank. And now we can go on whoever we want and just DPS them down because of the fact that we have just gotten to this location and we're using this location right here to create pressure. You can optionally sit in this brush right here since you have established a pink, but the biggest problem with this brush in most cases for most people is that if they do throw any spells or pink over the wall or even green ward and they force you out, then you have to go all the way up and around. That's why this brush for the most part is the preferred location, just because of the fact that you have a lot more angles and options for creating pressure on this fight. And as you can kind of see, yeah. It's just super easy for us to turn in and look for team fights because I'm in a location that just allows me to selectively engage, which is important because I get to kind of choose the targets that we start on. And if more people funnel in to trying to reinforce this location, then we're just on top of more people.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
There isn't like a similar brush if you're a blue team, right? With the same flank angles?
Yeah, so we'll be going over different brushes for different angles, but actually there is. So the dynamic changes super differently when you're on the blue side. So as you can kind of see, this is the funnel for for the enemy blue side, right? For the enemy bot side, and this is the funnel for the enemy top side. So whenever you're playing tanks on the on the other side, right? So we're on the bottom side and they're coming from the top side. You have a couple of options. This is the location that usually you use. So the reason for that is that, see how in this location, it's a lot easier for them to check because they can control this space really, really well. So they can throw spells and check. But this location and this location are really good for when they're funneling through this location because of the fact that in order for them to check, they have to go from brush to brush. And you can actually force a fight in the choke. Plus, on top of that, you can also force around this location because of the fact that most people who are funneling through here aren't going to walk all the way back over here to throw spells. Whereas you can kind of see right here how the terrain forces you to basically walk next to this brush anyway. So it's more likely that people will throw spells or check this location than when people are walking through this location. It is a lot harder for sure, and this is definitely a more specific side advantage for this brush, but you can still utilize these brushes for the most part, just depending on where people are moving from. So we're going to actually have now a different kind of dragon fight, which is going to be a scenario where you're late, right? So you can't always get there on time all the time. So I'm going to show you kind of how to posture and position around dragon fights when you're not there and don't have an ideal fight. Because, you know, we don't always get those coordinated and organized gameplays where we're, you know, sitting on the vision, getting to control it, etc. So let's show you kind of a scenario where you can't actually establish vision first. So as you can kind of see right here, they've established vision first. They've gotten to the location first. We need to now gain control of that location. So how do we do that? A couple of things. Number one is controlling the space that they give you. So as you can kind of see right here, remember we want to establish a pink here and ward over when we're on the red side, the top side, right? So what you want to do is actively deny that. So if you're a support and no one has pinked this, you should pink this location while you're over the wall. That way it makes way significantly harder for them to throw spells over the wall and score kills on you. After clearing this ward and gaining control of this space, you want to just slowly inch your space. And this is why also the minute of 130 is really important to you guys, because it gives you more time to position, posture, and control locations. Whereas if you're 30 seconds before a dragon spawns and you show up here, then a lot of times you're forced to basically run in instantaneously. But because we're here in a timely manner, we have 2 waves usually, because the rule of 30 means, you know, about 25-30 seconds between reset and walking, and clearing vision. So that means that there's going to be 2 waves on mid that you need to deal with before moving over. And if you encounter scenarios where your teammates maybe aren't on the waves, making sure that you ping on your way or assist me so that people clear the waves with you is really, really important, because then it denies your opponent's ability to make options, and a lot of times they have to just come in on the dragon. And that will be your way to control fights. So once again, we've cleared out this, and we're slowly establishing some level of vision. So here's also another great scenario where the enemy team is also doing a good job. Remember, what we want to deny over the wall, they want to deny over the wall. So what you're going to mostly do in scenarios like this is controlling mid waves, as we've kind of already said, because I want you to think about waves as wards. When you push in this wave, as you can kind of see right here, now someone needs to catch it, right? Otherwise, then you have the option to run down mid and take turrets, or they'll just lose a lot of gold overall because they'll be losing waves. Now, every time that you clear a wave, that gives you kind of the initiative, or, you know, you get to go first in a lot of ways to control vision. So anytime you clear a wave, then you step in over here, you ping assist me, anytime that people are nearby you, and then we're going to try to control this vision. Now, let's say for whatever reason your teammate is resetting or buying. It's just important to exercise patience, but also play around your vision. So I'll use an example. Let's say Lucian is just not here yet. You know, he's taken too long and he's a little bit slower than other people. Then what you would want to do is clear this ward, or clear this wave, and then use the vision you've obtained to create pressure. So I would sit in this line brush and just wait for him to start showing up. We do one more wave, and then you can start moving over and entering. Patience is key when it comes to posturing for vision, because if you walk in too early, have to use your ultimate, lose a lot of health, etc., you're already in a bad scenario right now. So this is kind of like an example of more of a less than pristine scenario, plus also we're not able to obtain nearly the same level of vision. So also another thing to note too is if your opponents are controlling the space over this wall, then this brush is kind of the next best thing, because once again, right, we want to be forcing people through funnels, through chokes, and making them incredibly uncomfortable, where like you can either AoE them because they're all walking through at the same time, or you can bully people because they're spaced incorrectly. So like if the tank walks through and there's a lot of space between the tank and the next person, then sometimes you can DPS the tank while walking up and creating pressure on the back line. So these are kinds of scenarios that we want to create for ourselves and make sure that we're maintaining vision through all of these chokes. So once again, right, we've postured, we've cleared some wards, we've established a little bit of vision. Guess what? We need to do another wave, because that's kind of what you're going to always have, is when this is gray, that's going to be 2 waves minimum, because that's every 30 seconds a lane wave is going to spawn. So because of the fact also that we don't contribute, in the same concept that a tank doesn't contribute to damage on a dragon, you usually don't contribute to damage on a wave. So unless there are a lot of people contesting, a lot of times it's way better for you to just use the vision that you've established and just sit in it. because this allows you to kind of just posture, look for things. Now we've got our sweeper right. We can clear out another ward. It gives us a lot more flexibility when it comes to everything. And now you kind of see, right, that because of the pendulum swing that we've now gotten through pushing the wave first on mid lane, we're now able to get all of the vision down. It's just a slow and steady churn of pressure in that sense. So now what we're going to look at is kind of a team fight where, well, guess what? We didn't get to establish any chokes. So we're on the bottom side. We don't have like great flanks. The enemy players are able to kind of walk through and establish vision too. And we're going to actually have like kind of a more generic, team fight oriented dragon. So when it comes to team fighting around dragon, there's a couple of things. Posturing and positioning is really important, but also making sure that you disrupt things. So whenever you're playing champions that are tanks especially, what's important is if the enemy team has engaged, we want to make sure that it's split up. So for example, right, we have a Malphite and we have a Leona. Now it's really terrible if both of those players get onto the same target at once, but if one of them gets onto your target at one time, then it's significantly harder for them to win team fights. A lot of times, whenever I am entering into a team fight, I kind of already want to talk about or mentally think about what I want to do in the fight before the fight happens. So, in a fight like this, I either want to A, combo onto the Kaisa, or B, disrupt engage. So, whatever doesn't go in first, I want to stop from going in second. And that's kind of what it's really important for you. Whenever you have a lot of dead time in these kinds of scenarios, so like this is a lot of dead time, right? We're not immediately fighting, you're posturing, it's kind of a slower scenario. A really important thing for you guys to do is to actively just think about what you want to do in the fight, rather than always have to react to the fight. So if you do that more often, and this is more of a principle just in general, you'll find that you just team fight way better. Most of my fights nowadays, when I get to team fight, are not reactive. They're pre-planned. I already know kind of what I'm looking for in the team fight, and I'm just doing exactly what I've already established I want to do. So in these kinds of scenarios, utilize this extra space in the same way that I would tell you that whenever you reset, you should ask yourself what you're doing next. So just utilize the fact that there's some dead time where you can kind of use your mental brain and then do that. So as you can kind of see right here, Leona is looking in to go in, and we've already established, right? We just want to make sure that two people don't go in at once. So we're just going to headbutt and pulverize everybody. And by that time, right, it's created so much space that our teammates can actually just kite backwards. And then after that, since I see the Wukong, it's just easy for us to go in. Now, posturing and positioning is really, really important. So one thing that I just want to emphasize, when you're in a lot of open space as a tank, what you want to do is you want to be in front, but you don't want to be super in front. A huge mistake a lot of tanks make in most cases is they go way too far. You want to be close enough to your teammates that they can follow up on the spells, but still far enough in front that if they go on you, they aren't going on your teammate at the same time. So I want you to kind of just pay attention to my posturing and positioning, right? So you kind of like see how there's a concave in this location where people can still reach if I combo in, but if people get jumped on, I can still reinforce them if they get engaged on too, for like peeling and such. This gives you a lot more flexibility in team fights, and it's actually the mistake that the Leona ends up making, is they overreach too far on a fight that they don't actually have positional advantage. So I want you to pay attention to where everyone else is standing on the enemy team to kind of understand why the fight goes so bad. So you see how Kha'Zix is all the way back here, Kai'Sa's all the way back here. There's too many people from too far a distance. So if you're covering this much distance, who can follow up? Nobody can follow up. And that's why like the positioning that you want as a tank is just between everything, so that we're standing right here, so that it's just a lot easier. You can kind of see right here, right? If we get jumped on, no one gets AoE'd by it, but if we go in, there's a lot of people that can reinforce relatively quickly. So that's kind of like why it's really important to position in this way, especially when you're playing certain tanks. Any questions so far, or anything that people would like me to talk about before we jump into the next part?
You have mentioned posturing, but what does that mean exactly?
Oh, posturing is like getting into position. So like when I say posturing, what I mean by is I'm standing in a location that allows me to make a lot of options. So like posturing is just I'm standing here, as in like I'm constantly moving back and forth with my teammates. So when you can kind of see here is that people are walking in, and then I'm walking back in with them. So anytime that they stop walking, right? So like if they stop walking, then I scoot back a little bit. And if they keep moving forward, then I move forward with them. Kind of like a tight circle is basically what we're looking for, right? You see how like there's a tight circle for all of these players? That's what's really important, is just being able to reach everybody. So you can kind of see right here that here's like basically my combo range. Like here's the circle for my combo range. Not a very good circle, obviously. But so I can help anyone that goes in on my teammates, but I can also go on anyone here, and I can still receive pressure in that sense. So posturing is just the act of, actively looking for the location for me to stand in. Like getting ready, I guess, is a better way. I'm prepared. I'm prepared for the fight with the spot that I am currently standing on. So that's kind of what I mean by posturing in that sense.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Do you plan on talking about like when it's the right decision to just give up a dragon?
Yeah, sure. We can actually go over that after we've done like what good dragons look like. I can definitely do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Actually, I'll just do it right now. So I don't have VODs prepared for that. So what I'll do is just a couple of visual things for something like that. So the times where giving up dragons is really, really just kind of meaningful or mindful. Remember how we were talking about the rule of 130, which is that we want to be, resetting at 1 minute and 30 seconds, and that usually around the minute before the dragon is kind of where everything's happening. If you, for whatever reason, encounter fights and you use really big cooldowns in this location, then sometimes giving dragons up just because of that is really, really important. So an example of this is, I'm sure a bunch of people have been playing Seraphine recently. Her cooldown on her ult is insanely long in the early stages. So if you, for whatever reason, have like a dragon or a fight like at around minute 30, minute before dragon, and you can't get to this location, like let's say it doesn't go well, then letting the dragon go is fine. The main thing is the first 2 dragons don't actually matter. So one thing that I want you to understand is especially the first dragon, it's almost meaningless. So if you can't get there and fight almost immediately, then usually you just don't fight over it. I've watched a lot of lessons where people have gone to dragons where a teammate is dead or like people are low on HP, etc. Don't kill yourself for a dragon unless it's a soul, in general. Communicating pings like back off or like don't do that, etc. is super helpful in that case. So anytime that like big ults are down, or if people are too slow, that's another thing too. So let's say, for example, that when we were doing this posturing for vision control, right? When we kind of use the example of like, okay, let's say if like Lucian is just like way too late or something, or you can't contest any of this vision, then what you should do is you should just play to the other side. So let's use an example of like your top laner doesn't have TP. So your top laner doesn't have TP, and we're gonna be the blue side, right? Your top laner has no TP, and he's on this side and he's pushing, right? An option, especially for support players, is what you can do is you can just take pressure on the other side of the map. So, for example, let's say that for whatever reason you don't feel like you can move over to this, or your top laner is just split pushing, right? It's the first or second dragon, or maybe even the third in some cases. It's totally fine as the support or other players, if you play a different role, to then just get vision on the other side of the map and just let it go. The main tools basically for contesting dragons is how strong are you in team fights? Are you getting crushed in the early game? So let's say like you're just down a ton of gold, right? You've died a lot of times. Score is like 12-3 or something. Then letting the first 2 or 3 dragons go is fine. But what you should do is you should actively look for pressure somewhere else. So if the dragons are on the bottom side, well, guess what? If the enemy team is winning, they're probably just going to go over to the dragons. So that means that you usually don't have numbers. They don't have numbers on the other side of the map. So utilizing that to just establish vision in these kinds of locations is really, really a good way to like get yourself back in the game and get some value out of a losing position. Also, another thing too is in dragon fights, if you can't get a good position first, and you feel like you can't force your way into it, then letting it go in that sense is good too. So anyone who plays like maybe you're just an enchanter, right? You're you're a ranged champion, you die very fast, etc. Then basically what you want to do is actively avoid those kinds of scenarios by making sure that you just don't face check. You just focus on the mid waves. Remember what I told you where If you push in the mid wave, it gives you options on the map. What you can do in a lot of situations is, let's say you've lost control of this space. So like the enemy team just has pink wards in these locations and you can't do anything about it, but you're still actively grouping mid to pressure waves. Then what happens is you can just push down this wave and you can go for the turret and you can do what's called pivoting or like posturing, where like you're standing on this side of the area, so that if the enemy players come through this location, right, they come through the brushes in advantage, you have an exit strategy. And then this allows you to also establish vision on this side. So this is kind of how you play from a losing position where maybe you can't get dragons, or how to identify when you can't get dragons. So just to kind of tie that in, big cooldowns. If you've used big ulti cooldowns, Karthus ult, Seraphine ult, Galio ult, right? These things that are super pivotal for your team fights and they're not going to come up anytime soon for the dragon, don't fight the dragon. If you are losing team fights already or super far behind, don't fight over the second dragon, the first dragon, or even the third dragon. Wait for you to get more even. The way I want you to think about the game is that each item, like the income of the game is the same on both sides if no one is dying. If you're each team is killing minions the entire time, then you'll be farming items to where you can be on a more even playing field. So for example, right, if an enemy team is super far ahead and they have 2 items and you have 1 item, they have 100% more power than you. Whereas if you don't fight over a dragon, you wait a little bit longer, a 2 item to a 3 item means that they're not 100% above you, right? They're only 50% above you. So then the fight can be more statistically closer, depending on like how the fight plays out. So that's like the mentality behind it, is don't kill yourself over like the first couple of dragons if it doesn't feel like you can contest them for whatever reason, ultis, positional, itemization, etc. Because of the fact that as the game goes on, you will be able to end up fighting this. But make sure that if you don't fight for the first 3 dragons and the enemy team's at soul point, that you're incredibly diligent about your 130 rule. Because at that point in time, the only way you're going to be able to contest it in those kinds of scenarios is by being here first and establishing the vision, so that you can control the pace of the fight and you can control what happens in these fights. So this is kind of a dragon fight where you get super late to the dragon and how to basically force a winning position when even though you're not there quite yet. So sometimes dragons, by the way, you don't fight for the dragon, you fight for the fight. So what I mean by that is the dragon is sometimes neutrally unobtainable. Like you're there too late, but you're there in time for people to be there for you to have a fight. So scenarios like this are really, really good for you to just look for fights where you can engage on people, create pressure, and not worry about the neutral objective, but just focus on the fight. This is kind of a concept maybe you've heard in like competitive games or in voice comms for like the Twitch rivals especially, is to play for fight. Don't worry about the neutral objective. So this is kind of a scenario where, oh shit, we're just late. Look, like we're just 100% late. But how you can like play around those scenarios and still gain value out of it despite actually being late to a neutral objective. Walking up. So for example, right, as we can kind of see right here, even though we're actually late to the neutral objective, they're also late to the neutral objective because we've established vision behind this. Actually, what I want to show you is kind of converting victories into valuable assets. So what I want you to actually pay attention to is kind of the rule of 130, but before 130. So sometimes in scenarios, an enemy team makes a play on the opposite side of the map. So this is a great example actually of kind of like the inverse of our dragons that we just talked about, where when your opponents make overwhelming plays on a side, that means that there can't be that many people on the other side. So we kind of see right here, right? They turret dive and there's multiple people on the opposite side. So you can apply the same inverse to if the enemy team gets dragon side. So because of the fact that we're on this side and they're on that side, it allows us to establish vision beforehand. Now, sometimes you get vision before 1:30 because your wards can fade. Your wards fade, if you don't know, after 2.5 minutes. So it's actually very easy for your wards to actually time out. That's why being timely with your resets is very, very important. So main thing to note is converting vision into more vision or value. So because of the fact that we're here first and we can establish vision, what you can then do is just give ground and then use your vision as an advantage. So you can kind of see right here, when we establish vision, sometimes your teammates aren't there to sit on it, right? We aren't there to get the follow-ups, catch people coming through these corridors, etc. But what vision also does is it gives you a ton of information. So using that information is super, super important. As you can kind of see right here, all of our vision gives us the information that not everyone is at the dragon area, which makes it so it's a lot easier for you to consciously make decisions. Especially for people who like playing tanks and engaged supports, this is super important because of the fact that we always want to make sure that we are in full vision of people the entire time. And we want to make sure that when we engage, we know we're not going to die instantly and get spam pinged that we're trolling. So because of that, we see that these carries are all the way back here. It actually allows us to just go in on them and create space on these players. Not every dragon do you have to win a fight. That's an important thing to really take away from this location, is the fact that just being there with your vision and being timely and zoning people away can obtain you dragons, even if you don't actually need to win a fight. So as you can kind of see right here, we've now forced the jungler out of this location, and what's important is just controlling the space. So we can use this space that we have by walking up over and over again, absorbing any of the damage, and because of that and throwing spells at them, we just completely zone them away from the dragon and actually obtain this dragon without scoring any kills whatsoever. So sometimes it's not that big of a deal for you to just create pressure on people in the sense of scoring kills or winning team fights, etc. You can actually obtain a lot of dragons just by being here first and posturing in a way that allows them to not walk through you and forces them back. So that's kind of like the tackling points for obtaining dragons, kind of getting vision down, kind of creating pressure in that sense for most of these scenarios. Oh, so some people wanted to see a scenario where, all right, I'm not a tank champion, right? So I do have something prepped for that. So I'm not a tank champion anymore. We are a squishy champion, right? It's very easy for you to die, to basically fall over instantaneously. So we're going to tackle kind of how to navigate a game for positioning and pressure when it comes to being an enchanter, or like a ranged champion in general. So primary thing, once again, right, is we want to establish vision in the mid lane. So we're going to stand here. As we can see right here, it's gray. That means there's probably going to be about 2 waves here. And we want to constantly push in the mid wave and establish vision in these locations. One thing to note too, though, is when you play enchanters, you don't have nearly the same setup when it comes to picking people off. So that means when you put down your pinks, you better be damn well sure that your teammates are standing around. So a thing I want you to point out to you right now is I have a pink, but it's not in this line brush. Why isn't it in this line brush? Because you can kind of see right here that 2 of my players aren't there. So because of whenever you play like an enchanter-like champion, you can't actually engage, pick people. You don't nearly have the same level of CC and blow up that you have on like a Galio, a Thresh, etc. It's really important that when you have pinks, that we're not wasting them. So if you get to this location first, we still want to make sure that we're sitting on our vision. That way we can still protect it whenever we can. So as you can see right here, number one thing that I want you to take away is play for the mid waves. That is the main thing while you're waiting for your teammates to kind of arrive and show up, because you don't have the options to face check like you did before. So the best way to leverage pressure is to push in mid with your range advantage, and then that way it allows you to then walk over and contest the vision. So let's talk about a different kind of team fight, actually. So this fight, we don't get anyone through this choke. Your vision advantage is relatively meaningless for this fight just because of the fact that it's forced them to walk into the bottom side of the scenario. So we're going to have like a completely different looking team fight than before. So main thing that matters is making sure that you're always behind your tanks. A lot of people, when I watch them play, shielding, healing champions, etc., keep track of people who can engage on you and position behind tanks and wait for fights to happen before you start them. A lot of times when people play ranged champions, they tend to try to stand next to their tank to create pressure on the enemy players. That's not how you want a team fight. You almost always want to have the fight start and then you enter into the fight afterwards. If you are the one who starts the fights, then usually you are also in a scenario where the fight can start on you, and that's very easy for you to die instantly. So whenever you're playing a squishy champion, Seraphine, Senna, Nami, Lulu, etc., we want to make sure that our positioning is in a way that we're between the tanks and the engaged sources. So as you can see right here, I want you to kind of look at the line that we have created now. So I'm all the way back here. Oh, and another thing to note too is usually when you're a ranged champion, you can actually deliver damage to the dragon. So that's also why we don't stand in any of these brushes. So you can kind of see here, right? We're delivering damage to the dragon because, you know, enchanters can do it from long range and they don't have the tools to like force fights anyway. So we want to just make sure that we're keeping track of everything. So the advantage that we get, right, is we have pinks behind us so you can kind of see if anyone is flanking you. And the most important thing is to keep track of people like this Renekton. You want to make sure that you're never in a position where Renekton can jump on you. That means that you shouldn't be auto-attacking or creating pressure on them either, which is the number one mistake I see a lot of people make is they think, oh, okay, well, you know, if I keep him at my max range, I can throw spells at him. That's a big no-no. Don't do that. We want to just make sure that we're positioned in a way where the tanks run into each other, you know, the two engaged sources run into each other, and then we throw spells at whatever's in front of us. And if you have fights like that, and you play Enchanter, Healing Champions, etc., you'll usually have very advantageous to very consistent good dragon fighting. Because the way I want you to think about it when you're playing things that are ranged champions is the longer you're alive, the more spells you can cast. And the more spells you can cast, the more valuable you just become by nature of numbers. So, as you can see right here, right, we're positioning in a way where we're standing behind everybody. We're way, way, way far back, and we're just positioning and posturing based on how enemy players walk up. So you can kind of see right here, the Renekton walks up. Guess what? I'm running backwards. I don't want to be in range for him to engage. And what we're doing is we're just making it so that we're creating space between us and our engages and their engages. So you can kind of see now, right? We've created a scenario where now, oh, look, the two tanks have collided with each other. That way we can play off of that. So we just throw spells at whoever we can. Notice how I haven't even gone for an auto attack yet. It's just about positioning to make sure that once the fight runs into each other and cooldowns are used, then we're having the fight. So we're just constantly repositioning. You see how I'm scooting back. We're giving ground because he's walking up. We're just constantly playing around our tank as much as possible until the fight has collided with each other and then the fight has begun. So I guess a question that people would have is like, how do I know when the fight is collided? Examples of this are just the either mobility or CC of whatever the frontliners are. So in this game, it would be Renekton E and the Renekton W. So his dashes and his stuns. That's how you know the fight has started. Or if, for whatever reason, my Wukong E's in and ulties. Or if my Gragas E's into them with his body slam. So you're just looking for basically linear spells that just say go in most of these cases. So like another example would just be like Malphite ultimate. Or an ultimate, or Malachi snares in, or Galio starts channeling taunt or ease. Those are these kinds of buttons that we're looking for the engage. Or, you know, I'm sure a lot of people play against Camille, so we would be waiting for Camille E to go off. So we're just constantly positioning and repositioning over and over again until a fight starts. So as we kind of see right here, right, they get pulled in, and we've have a fight starting. So the charm is going to go off. There's a little bit of fighting here, and that's when we're going to start throwing some of our damage. Now, for certain champions, you have long-range spells. So for examples of this are things like Nami, Seraphine, Senna, Soraka. All of these champions have like roots or ultis that they can throw from really long range. This is usually what you should start the fight with, not end the fight with. The reason for that is you can throw them at max range. So what you can kind of see right here, right, is that I've started a fight where I'm not actually in range to auto attack because I want to actively avoid getting dashed on and stunned on. So because of that, we're just going to use our ultimate immediately. So if you ever have long range spells that you can throw out, Seraphine ult, Nami ult, Senna ult, Soraka ult, these kinds of spells, we want to be throwing those out immediately because those are things that you can do while positioning really, really safe. And that's what usually allows you to attribute to the team fight while moving forward to actually start team fighting. So you can kind of see right here, we use our ultimate, and now we can start moving in and just DPSing whoever we can. So you can kind of see, right, like the longer you're alive, the way better you are just in the scenario. And then as you start winning the fight, it allows you to kind of walk down and start fighting more frequently. The main thing that I want you to take away from fights like this is just positioning. It's really, really important. I know it feels super good to like hit people with spells or harass them as they're coming in. And for some champions, that's okay. But for most champions, if you're going to play ranged supports, I assume that most of you guys like playing like enchanters or something like that, it's really important that just the fight doesn't start on your face. That's what's most important. And then just finding a way to contribute a long range spell so that you can then move forward and contribute to the fight afterwards. Because the worst thing that you can do as, you know, Sona, Soraka, Morgana, etc., is that you start the fight dead. It's just not worth it in most cases. So make sure that you're posturing and positioning around your teammates, so that way we are able to throw spells. I think that pretty much covers like what I wanted to talk about for this class. So anyone have like any specific questions or anything like that that they'd like to discuss that maybe I didn't talk about or didn't show in this lesson?
On the red side, the brush from the mid lane where you can flank.
This one, right?
No, not the line, not
This
the line
one.
brush. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So their top lane was standing there,
Yeah.
and like my team, the front line of my team just went to the dragon, and
Like
he
here.
zoned, yeah, and he zoned me and my AD carry completely, the fight. So
Okay, so there's a couple of options that you can do to deal with that. So did you saw him on a ward, right? He was just standing right here, or like you saw him in the space right here, and you're basically what you're saying is like your teammates funneled through this location, but you couldn't follow because, you know, you and your AD carry are all the way back here. So you're like kind of in a scenario where like here's where like the rest of your team is, and here is where like the top laner is. He's zoning all of you from that location.
that's right.
Okay, so a couple things that go into this. Number one is vision control, right? So if we have better vision control and you can see that, then you can ping and go on this player, right? You can DPS this player because it's you and your AD carry plus anyone else that reinforces in this location. Because if players are not near him, so let's say like he's by himself, he's isolated, and then the rest of the people are contesting maybe from the bottom side, then you should be able to just create a space where you can just go on him. Another option too is that if you have a lot of extra time, is that you can walk down and around. A lot of times there's actually a blast plant, so it actually allows you to reposition like this. If there's ever a blast plant, that's an option you can exercise too. The main thing is whenever you have a scenario where someone's cutting you off, this is why like posturing and positioning like tight to your teammates but not too far away is really, really important. So you should just be walking in a way that if this player goes on you, then the rest of your teammates just collapse on him and he dies instantly. One thing is maybe the problem is if you are in a scenario where it's just this player, then you just need to create pressure on him by running at him and pinging on your way to this guy. That way you force him out. Because if you don't force him out of that location, then he'll just constantly zone you over and over again, right? So what you want to do is you want to be the one who starts the fight by starting it on him. And a lot of that just ties back to the fact that if you're there and you have vision of him the entire time and you can see the rest of the players and you know that, you know, no one else is reinforcing, then you should be able to create pressure / push him off of this location. Hopefully you guys found this super helpful. And yeah, I mean, that pretty much is it. Class dismissed. Thanks for coming by, guys. I appreciate it a lot.